Well, folks, it's Bryon Howard here, and I have on my show, Living in Calgary, Real Estate and Lifestyle, a longtime fan of Mario Toneguzzi. Am I saying your last name
Yeah,
right?
that's good. Pretty good.
And Mario, I moved to Calgary in 2003 from the East Coast of Canada. I moved here primarily for the schools and the Alberta Advantage, the economy. I sort of fell into real estate as opposed to wanting to, be a realtor, but it's been a great career the last 20-ish years. And I've been a longtime follower of you and fan of you. Mario is, I guess, probably started his career 37 years ago with Calgary Herald. Longtime reporter, just being in that capacity over the last 37 years, Mario, you've seen an awful lot of changes and you have repositioned yourself these days to be a freelancer. You're doing lots of digital marketing and podcasting and journalist type behavior, and was recently recognized as one of the most top 10 influential business reporters in the world. Mario, great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. And just that, it's actually, I shouldn't say this, but it's actually 40 plus years now.
Right. I assume so.
Yeah, there was 35 years at the Herald, and I started my career May 1979 in the little town of Nelson, BC, and then moved to Calgary in October of 1980. And
really?
Boy, what a time to move to Calgary.
It was. So it was exciting. Just as the market was like really heating up about 1980 and then sort of crashing. Was it late 81 or early 82 that the first crash happened in your life in Calgary?
Around then, but you know what's interesting? I'm actually from the East too. I'm not far east, but I'm from Ontario. I was born and raised in Ottawa, and I moved out, as I said, to Nelson. But I remember the day that I came to Calgary. It was October 28th, 1980. And I remember I was, worked down, the Herald had a building downtown, right? At that time, it was right across from the bay there on 7th Avenue. Mm-hmm. And for the first week, the Herald put me up in a hotel. Behind the Herald was called the Empress Hotel. Again, all those buildings are gone now. But the first morning, I remember walking downstairs for breakfast, and everybody was wearing a ball cap, and everybody was cursing and swearing about Trudeau and the Liberals and the federal government. And I'm going, I better be quiet. I'm from Ottawa originally. I had no idea what was going on. Years later, I'm in the business. I'm working as a business writer at the Herald. And I'm reading a story about the anniversary of the introduction of the National Energy Program, October 28th, 1980. And I went, oh my gosh.
The day you moved here.
Explains everything.
Wow, that is a great story. How come you moved to Nelson? Was it just like, the job offer in the reporting business fresh out of university or something?
Yeah, well, I got out of university. It's kind of weird. And I had a degree in journalism at Carleton University in Ottawa. And I started looking for jobs. And ironically, the first job that I got, the offer, was in Grand Prairie, of all places. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I was covering sports, right? I was a sports writer. And so I talked to the editor of the Grand Prairie paper, and I was asking, what would I cover? Yeah, and he said, the typical sports that we have is hockey and and baseball and all that stuff. And then he said, and chuck wagon racing. I said, what? I remember I just lived all my life in Ottawa. I had no idea what chuck wagon racing was. And so he kind of explained it to me. And then the irony of ironies was that years later, when I joined the Calgary Herald, guess what I'm covering for the Herald? 10 solid days at the chuck wagon races, right at the Stampede Park. But, I looked at that job and I told him, give me a day to think. And then I looked at the map and I saw where Grand Prairie was up here on the map in Alberta. I said, nah, I don't think I'll make the move. And then Nelson came about, and I have family and relatives in Trail, BC, which is not far away. And I just thought, what the heck, right? And moved there and just absolutely loved it. Absolutely adored that place.
Were you a skier? Because I think Nelson, I think skiing. No.
I wasn't a skier, right? And it's funny because I learned to ski there, Whitewater, I think, at the ski hill there. And then I remember the manager of the hill calling me and saying, "Oh, I see you're the new sports editor for the paper." He says, "Why don't you come out skiing?" I said, "I don't know how to ski, right? Never skied in my life." And he said, "Well, we'll give you lessons." Okay, sure. So I learned how to ski there.
Oh, that's great. And you mentioned that you moved there and with family in trail. And of course, all these years I looked at your name and I thought, it didn't really ring any bells. But most recently, I sort of said, oh, I got to reach out to Mario when I seen a LinkedIn post when you had just been, I don't know, agreed or something on is it the Calgary Italian Board of Directors or something? Tell us
Yeah,
about your
yeah.
family, your name, and this most recent post.
Yeah, it's the Calgary Italian Cultural Center. Basically, it's the Calgary Italian Club, right? And yeah, no, they asked me to join the board there, and yeah, I look forward to it. I spend a lot of time there. All your listeners, if you want really good food, downstairs in the basement is a little restaurant called La Cantina, and it's operated by Roma Catering. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic food. And the whole cultural experience, because right beside the dining area are five bocce lanes. So depending on when you go in to dine, you might see some of the older guys and women playing bocce in leagues there. I'm actually part of the league there, so I play every week. So
Cool. Well, I mean, having this connection, you assume that all Calgarians know where the Italian club is, but where is it? Actually, I'm thinking it might be up in Crescent Heights, is it?
no, well, I guess technically it would. Well, I don't know if it's technically Crescent Heights or technically Bridgeland, but it's just off of Edmonton Trail there.
Right. Northeast side of
Yeah, as you come down the
Center
hill
Street.
on Edmonton Trail, just before Memorial on the right-hand side, it's right there. So, yeah.
And you have a watch with Italian flag on it. I just saw it in our Zoom. So Mario, tell us about your Italian roots. Are you a first generation Canadian or what? Tell us about your Italian background.
Okay. So I was born in Ottawa, and I have an older brother. He was born in Italy, but my father came, I think it was 1952, came to Canada. We're from the northern part of Italy, northeastern part of Italy, better known as like Friuli, basically straight north of Venice, about an hour's drive straight north of Venice, just for some context. So yeah, my dad came. He was in Windsor, Ontario for a little while doing construction. Then he moved to Ottawa. And then he brought my mom, who was in Italy at the time. He brought her over once he was established here, and my older brother. And yeah, so yeah, it's always, and you know what the funny thing is, I never knew this, but my wife always talked to my father for years about the history of things, etc. But apparently I had no English when I first went to
Really?
kindergarten. Because I was at home with my mom all day, and my mom's, was at home all the time, and she didn't speak much English either. And the community in Ottawa she was surrounded with, and all friends were all Italian. So yeah, so I learned English in kindergarten.
Wow. And how in your daily activities currently, are you speaking Italian daily? Like very
No.
often in Calgary? Weekly? Like I guess weekly when you're bocce club or
Well, it's tough, right? I think it's like that for anybody, right? If you're separated from the language on a daily basis, you lose it, right? And my mom passed away like many, many, many years ago. My dad passed away. I think it's going on 13 years soon. So that daily exposure of talking to them, you lose it, right? And so I understand it. I can hear, when I play bocce or whatever, I understand what people are saying. Sometimes they're surprised by that. But the speaking part is tough because you have to start formulating the words and in your head, etc. So I'd have to be, years ago, we went to Italy as a family on a holiday and for a month. And after a week of being just immersed in the language, like on a daily basis, constantly, it started all coming back to me. So I could, the longer that trip was on, the more I was able to converse in Italian.
Well, that's great. Mario, what strikes you most about living in Calgary?
Wow.
Big question.
You know what? I what I like the most is almost everywhere you go, the nature of things, right? Not to be David Suzuki, the nature of things, but right? I live in the Northwest, and I can see the Rockies and the snow-capped Rockies every day, right? I have access to so many different places that I can go to spend time outdoors, even just within your own neighborhood, right? There's so much. I'm close to the Bow River, all that. I just think that Calgary, with all its landscape and parks, Nose Hill Park, Fish Creek Park, you name it, right? It's incredible. I'll tell you a quick story. Years ago, I was living a different place. I was living sort of northeast Calgary, just off the river there and off of Deerfoot. And I would often walk downtown, about a 40-minute walk from there, right? Get on the bike path and walk along the river to get there. But I'd often grab a bagel and a coffee and sit there where the Eau Claire Y is, right? And sit there with a newspaper and read a book. And I remember one day a guy in a suit, business suit, with a little briefcase, walking by me. And then he looked at me, kind of smiled, and then he kept walking. And then a few paces later, he stopped, he turned around and he said, he says, I'm from Chicago. He says, what you guys have here, a park like this, Princess Island, right in the heart of downtown is absolutely amazing, he said. And he turned around and walked away, right?
That's great.
I thought, that's to me, that's the one of the biggest attractions that Calgary has, its connection to nature.
Very nice. And these days, this is kind of a funny question. What's easy for you these days? And maybe you can relate it in the same conversation. What's hard for you these days?
Well, I'll tell you what's easy. And it's funny because a lot of people who know me and know the work I do is I do a ton of work, like a lot. And I kind of pound out things like crazy. And everybody always asks me, well, how do you do this? How do you do this? And I keep saying that, well, it's 40 years of doing it, right? It's like Gretzky, like how many times that he sat in his, on his rink in his backyard or whatever, and just took shots and shots and shots, and it just becomes routine, right? I remember there used to be one of the basketball players that I covered in my sports writing days at the University of Calgary, Carl Tillman. He was on the Olympic team and was a member of the University of Calgary Dinos. I remember him telling me that that's all he did, sat in his driveway shooting baskets, boom, 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 boom. Right. And it's kind of like the same thing here. Like I've written so many stories, I know so many people, I know where to go for the stories. So that's what becomes easy. It doesn't mean it's not busy and challenging because of that, but it's a routine that you developed over the years that is beneficial. What's challenging or difficult is kind of sometimes juggling a lot of stuff, right? Because I do a lot of work for a lot of different places and people. So that is, I have to make sure I'm on top of organizing things. And, I'm a kind of a stickler for organization. So, I draw up lists, like, and stuff like that, and just reminders that, okay, this story is due this day, this story is due that day, all that stuff, just to keep me on track and keep me focused, and it all gets done. Every once in a while I'll sit there and go, oh my gosh, all this work, how am I going to get this done? Right. And then I sit back and think, you know what? I've been through this 100 whatever times, hundreds of times, and it always gets done. So you relax.
Curious, are you an early morning person?
Oh gosh, yeah.
You are, like, what time? 5 a.m.?
5, but today, this morning was 4:20.
Oh wow! So you're
yeah,
up.
It's so weird. I woke up this morning, it was 4:20, and I must have had a good sleep because I thought, oh, okay, time to get up.
Nice. And then you start your work. You start your work. You're writing at that time, early in the morning.
Yeah, I start doing stuff at that time, but I always find it's such a great time. I think there's a book out there, right? Like 5 a.m. Club or something like that.
I'm a member.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay. Super. But I totally understand and get it, right? Because even way back in my Herald days as well, I've always gotten up early. And, at that time I was walking, I was doing a lot of walking. So I would go at 5 a.m. and go for a long walk, say an hour's walk. In the dead of winter, like 30 below with the wind howling, I'd still go. And everything, I always found it such a peaceful time because nobody in the family is up, right? They're all sleeping. There's minimal traffic out there, minimal people out and about. It's always been a good time in the morning for me to think and be peaceful and tranquil before the whirlwind of activity begins for the day.
I understand completely. Mario, tell me a little bit about some of your real estate decisions in Calgary. You mentioned that you lived in the Northwest, and you mentioned that you lived kind of in walking distance, 40 minutes from downtown, kind of in the Northeast.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just guessing that could have been Mayland Heights.
Exactly. It was Mayland Heights.
And so tell and like for Calgarians and for maybe non-Calgarians listening to this, once you move to the north, you're not allowed to come to the south again, or actually it doesn't happen a lot. Anyway, can you share a little bit about your real estate decisions? Like how many homes have you owned in Calgary or that sort of thing?
So this one would be what's the number 3.
Oh, nice.
Third home. But you know what? It's funny. I was thinking fairly recently at how many places I've lived in Calgary, right? And how many different apartments. But I started, when I first came, 1980, vacancy was 0. Like I had a tough time finding a place. Found a place. I found a place in Inglewood along 9th Avenue there, along Atlantic Avenue now, right near where the Ironwood is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and it was the only thing I could find. And I was up, I think it was about 3rd floor or whatever. And I remember one morning waking up and listening on the radio about a biker shot in the middle of the street dead, right? And I remember going to my colleagues at work saying, geez, hear what happened. And I told them, and they all laughed, and they said, well, of course you're living in Inglewood, right? How the hell did I know, right? I just moved to the city, right? Obviously, Inglewood, for anybody who's going to get mad at me for saying that, Inglewood is completely different. It's one of my favorite places in the city to visit and spend time with now. But so yeah, went from there. Then I ended up a kitty corner to the old downtown science center. On I think it's 5th Avenue or 6th Avenue around there. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I went to the university across from the McMahon Stadium. These were all apartments. And I went to Deer Run, and then I was in Bownness for a while, and then I was in Mount Pleasant, then Mayland Heights, and then out here in Silver Springs now. So I've been around different neighborhoods for a while.
Oh, nice. That's great.
Unique. And it's funny you mentioned the South thing, because isn't that the case though in Calgary? You get into a certain quadrant of the city and your whole life is there, right? And you don't experience different areas like the deep southeast and southwest. Like for me, boy, I don't know. I was in Mahogany recently. Had no idea.
And going to Mahogany, for whatever the reason it was, you were going there, like whether to visit a friend or something, it's kind of like, I'm going to this place that has nothing to do with me or my life, and why the hell would anyone live here? I'm sure is what you were thinking, as most Calgarians do about their particular, wherever they land, they kind of stay, it seems.
Yeah, no, it's funny, because and in many ways, the Northwest was always in my DNA, so to speak. I just thought, I just love the Northwest and I've always wanted to get back after I had been in Mayland Heights. So yeah.
Interesting. When I moved here, actually I lived in Crescent Heights of our first year in an apartment. And then we moved to Marteloup area, all to the southwest. And I've been here ever since. And I cannot imagine ever living in any other quadrant than the Southwest. I could imagine moving out of my community, but I probably won't. But it would only be the Southwest. And that's just something about Calgary and Calgarians. I don't know the answer why.
Yeah. And I don't, it's interesting. I don't know if I don't recall, that being the case when I was living in Ottawa, but in Calgary, it's really a defined thing that you spend the majority of your time. Obviously you do because of where you live, but it's also the choice that you want to spend the majority of your time in the quadrant that you live in.
Mario, you moved to Inglewood, and there was a death there shortly after motorcycle kind of violence or something. It sounds like you've lived in Bownness. Just want to have, maybe you could share with Calgarians and non-Calgarians a story about the promise of Inglewood that came. In Inglewood today is amazing. And then Bownness, let's look at the transition of Bownness since I've moved to the city about in the last 20 years. It's really come a long way.
Yeah.
Has the promise of what we were thinking would happen in Bownness, has it already occurred? And then related to Forest Lawn, International Avenue.
The thing is, though, each of those areas are so unique, right? And they give, in terms of amenities and stuff like that, they give you so much, right? And so much to experience. What I find unique, I won't talk about Forest Lawn for a second, but it's just Inglewood and Bownness. What I find unique about those is the diversity of people there. And of course, when you're talking real estate, the diversity of property there, right? You've got, you take Bownness, for example, you've got, obviously some older homes, smaller homes, a little run down in certain parts of Bownness, but then right around the corner, you've got these multi-million-dollar homes, right? And Inglewood's the same way in many ways, and then you see the transformation of some of these neighborhoods. Mount Pleasant, where I used to live, is an example. Renfrew is another example. West Hillhurst and those areas, where a lot of these older homes are, people buy the property because there's a lot of land on those properties, and basically demolishing the home and putting something new up, right? So there's really a transformation in a lot of these neighborhoods. What I'd like to see, and you mentioned like Forest Lawn and International Avenue, is I'd like to see more of those areas in Calgary, where you've got that
walkability and amenities.
The walkability, like the main street idea, whether it's a 17th Avenue Southwest or it's a 4th Street along Mission, that you can walk in Kensington, you can walk and spend time. I was just doing an interview the other day on the University District, right? And, it's a creation of a community where, it's an overworked phrase, but where people really can live, work, and play, right? And everything there, right, for them, right? And it's those neighborhoods, I think, that develop in that way are the kind of attractive neighborhoods for people, right?
Will Forest Lawn come to like an Inglewood or a Bownness or a Marda Loop? Like I moved in 2004 to Marda Loop, Altadore area. And I think that where I live and what's happened here since I've moved here is, the $1 million infills that are happening all over my neighborhood. I feel that this community is exact same proximity to downtown as Forest Lawn. I just wonder why Forest Lawn hasn't transitioned like Bownness or I wonder, will it come?
I don't know. You know what? It's, Forest Lawn has, its own issues, right? And I won't get into those because a lot of people will get mad at me. But, and you know what, in my real estate reporting days at the Herald, I remember doing, a couple of stories because you see the difference in home prices by each quadrant, right? And I remember people getting mad at me when, showing that. And I was saying, hey, I'm not
my fault.
Any judgment or anything on this. I'm just giving you the facts. This is what it is, right? But when you've got that main drag like that with all those businesses and all those great little food places and etc., it's like food heaven out there, right?
It is
to experience. So who knows? Right. Things change over time in neighborhoods, and as I said, Inglewood's a perfect example. You're probably not because you said 2003 you came here, right?
I moved to Calgary, yeah.
Okay, I remember. I remember a few years ago the Inglewood, and I don't know what their proper name is now, but it's like the business revitalization zone. I remember them putting out ads on television, right? And they were, if I recall correctly, there were a couple of Yahoo guys in a pickup truck driving around Inglewood looking for prostitutes, right? And whooping and stuff like that. And then they're kind of confused because they don't see any prostitutes, and they're like shaking their heads going, what's going on here, right? And the message, and I think the tagline was something like Inglewood, not what it used to be, or something, not the way you remember it.
Interesting.
Like that, right?
That's great.
And so that just shows you that, what, slowly but surely, neighborhoods get built. They got to start at a small step, like anything, and start and build on that foundation, right? It's like, oh, geez, look at East Village. Oh my gosh. Like talk about a neighborhood that's been built like incredibly, right?
Right.
I remember the days where, and I called it in stories, I called it a wasteland. It was an absolute urban wasteland. It just everything gutted, nothing but parking lots and fields there, right? And look at it now with all its towers and the library and the music center and
right.
hotels
awesome.
and you name it.
Mario, coming sort of the end, watching your time and everything. I was having a conversation recently with a young woman who was working out of her home office in Fredericton, New Brunswick. I guess that she was probably about 32 years old with a couple of small kids. And anyway, I was telling her about a little bit my story about coming to Calgary when I did, or just sort of telling why I came to Calgary, the Alberta Advantage, really the schools. And then for my kids. And she said, and she's again, I want to keep in mind her age, 32 years old, I guess, from looking. And she said, oh my, that's unusual that I would make that move. Most people are coming this way, meaning Albertans leaving and going back to the East Coast. Can you share a little bit about, the boom bust economy in Calgary and how you deal with it? And maybe just your projections of what's going to happen in the next 12 months or 5 years?
Oh boy, that's a question with a lot of different topics. Let's talk about the movement. First of all, like a lot of people, as you mentioned, because when the oil patch was quote unquote firing on all cylinders, right? Everybody coming here, Saskatchewan, the Maritimes, BC, everybody, Ontario, like, everyone's coming here because there are jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And now you're seeing a little bit of a difference there, that a lot of people went back to the Maritimes. But one of the things that I've come across recently is that Calgary has become a fairly attractive place for people because of affordability in homes, right? The home prices here compared to what they would be in Vancouver or Toronto, then absolutely don't compare. So that becomes an attraction for people to come here, becomes an attraction for businesses to move to Calgary, right? And I was having a discussion just yesterday with Van Willingen. Hope I pronounced his name right.
Dutch by chance, yeah.
Mac's a well-known Calgary and Alberta businessman. He was just named chair of the Business Council of Alberta. And, we were talking about how, we tend to forget, yes, things have been rough. They've been rough in Calgary since late 2014 when oil prices collapsed and have been like that for many, many years. And then, of course, you've got the pandemic. So lots of challenges on the economic side of things. But we tend to forget in all that doom and gloom that a lot of good things and positive things have been happening lately. Some of the industries, petrochemicals and hydrogen are starting to ramp up. And then of course the big one is the technology side, where we're seeing, there's been a whack of announcements recently about things coming, like Amazon Web Services and other players in that tech field. So, I think the future looks good, compared to where we've been. The diversity in the economy is taking place. And as, slowly but surely has been taking place in the last few years. That's just going to accelerate, I think, over time. And all the economic forecasts that I've seen lately show a good economic growth for the province here next year and the year after. Now, obviously, bear in mind that it's year over year comparisons, and this past year hasn't been great, and last year was even worse type thing. But you know what? Got to hold on to the positives, right? And so things look good. Things look good going forward. Climbing out of that hole that was dug, that started to dig in back late 2014.
Yeah. Mario, I love how you say you got to look into the positives. It seems like you're like me in that it's way more fun to be an optimist than a pessimist, and people like us more.
It can be draining, right? For people to be, it can be draining for people in a couple of ways. A is constantly getting the barrage of news and information that is always negative, right? From the media. That's one thing. And then of course, you can take it on a personal level too, right? When people are continually, I guess, focusing on the negative, oh, we're screwed here. Like, oh, geez, you know what? We got the Liberals back in power. Oh boy, a lot of stuff. But you can't get into that mindset, because it's a tough place to dig yourself out of. And just as a side, I don't know if but 6 years ago, it'll be 6 years ago next. A month and a half time, where I was laid off from the Herald,
Right.
and you could look at that. And granted, it's tough to go through a layoff, and you're in a down period in your life, etc. But if you dwell on that and stay there, and with all its emotions and moods that brings on, like the fear, the anxiety, the stress, the depression, all the negativity, all that stuff, if you stay there, you're going to stay there, right? So why not look at it as opportunity and to move on and do something, right? And I think Alberta is the same way. Like it's the same on a personal level as it is on a bigger level, whether it's a business or it's a province or a country. Yeah, things are tough, but how do you deal with them? That's the key. Are you resilient, and do you move on? There was a song, ATB used to have a commercial. It was keep moving on, keep moving on. And it was the song, right? It's an old, I looked it up. It's an old Sam Cooke song, keep moving on.
Oh, neat.
But it's a great message. Yeah, keep moving on.
Cool. Mario, the way that you have transformed your career, or, the career that you started and the career that you're in now, kind of the same thing, but like, I can't imagine many careers have changed as much as yours and has seen as much change. Well, and you're a real inspiration for how you've maintained and stayed so relevant in your career.
Well, thank you. I'll give this to the Herald, even though they laid me off. I did have, like all of us at that time that were laid off, had a kind of a session about workplace stuff, like transitioning thing. And this was with an independent consultant, right? That we had these workshops. And I always remember what she always said to us, in those sessions about, first of all, focusing on what you do and what are your skills, etc. But then looking at beyond what you've done for me with 35 years at the Herald, look beyond that. Okay, how can you take these skills and go into different directions? And that was a real eye-opener for me, because it really opened the door to a lot of different possibilities. That, okay, yeah, I'm a writer by trade, I'm a journalist, but where else can I use those skills? And so I've done everything, like, over the last 5.5 years or so, I've done everything from editing a script from a young lady who wanted to do a YouTube video on her life in Rwanda and how she lost all her family, to ghostwriting for business executives for, articles that go into trade publications, to, podcasts, to simple, writing for just different platforms, right? So that's the thing. It's just how you see things and how you see opportunity and keeping yourself open to that.
Mario, you're easy to find on social media, and you're fun to watch. What's the best way for people to sort of connect with you or see what you're up to? Which
My gosh.
platform?
Yeah, you're right. I'm all, everything's pretty simple with me. My Facebook is, just my name, and LinkedIn, the same thing. I post a lot of stuff there. On Instagram, same thing, just, Mario Toneguzzi. And Twitter, I'm trying to remember what that is. I think it's at MT capitals MTONE 123, I think it is. But yeah, I'm a big social media fan, a bit of a nut in that regard, but everything I do, every place that I write, etc., everything I post on all social media channels, I think it's the greatest things in sliced bread in many ways for business, right? Because I think if you're not on social media, whether you're an individual, an entrepreneur, or a company, you're missing the boat big time.
Mario, final question. If you had a billboard, your biggest billboard
Ooh.
in Calgary, let's say, what would it say? What would the billboard say?
You know what? I come back to my signature on my emails. And did you notice it, by the way?
I'm trying to think. I did notice your signature, but I don't remember a caption or a tagline.
The caption at the bottom is Carpe Diem. So
Carpe Diem, seize the day. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now on another screen.
There you go.
Carpe
Seize
Diem.
the day. And I've lived by that, I think, my whole life. More so in recent years, become more of a philosophy of mine than anything. So yeah.
Mario, thank you very much for being on the show. It's a pleasure to have a face-to-face with you for the first time.
Well, thank you. That was excellent. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed this.